Hello, and welcome to the Badger Talks podcast, the podcast that shares interviews with experts from the University of Wisconsin-Madison community about their work, research, and a little bit about what they're like as people, too. I'm your host, Buzz Kemper. Today, I'm happy to have as my guest Allison Jonjak, Cranberry Outreach Specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Allison grew up on a cranberry marsh founded by her grandfather in 1939. Studying agricultural engineering and soil chemistry, she worked with row crop farmers throughout the U.S. and Canada until the University of Wisconsin created a Cranberry Outreach Specialist position. This allowed Allison to return to her favorite state and work on keeping a tight feedback loop between growers and researchers of her favorite crop. Allison, thank you for doing the show. I am interested to learn more about cranberries because here we are in Wisconsin, and I didn't realize this until a few years ago, but we kind of rule the cranberry world, do we not?
This is our 20th year. This will be presumably our 21st year as the leading cranberry producing state in the world.
Okay, and I read 60% of the cranberries of the world are produced here.
And that fluctuates a little, 62%, 60%, but yeah, we are absolutely... If you're drinking cranberry juice, odds are really, really good that there's Wisconsin cranberries in there.
Yeah. Why is that? Is it our climate? Do we just have cranberry loving people here? What is our deal? How did we get that?
We actually have a really fantastic mixture of a really wonderful climate, great soils for cranberries, but also the sociology, our historical immigration patterns, and then also the culture of cranberry growers today. And of course, the partnership with the University of Wisconsin and all of the great research that's done here. So it's really a combination of factors that combines to make us the greatest producer of cranberries in the world.
Wow. That is so cool. And are cranberries, I don't know how to ask this question, are cranberries, the cranberries that we eat today, is this what we would have had in cranberries 200 years ago, or have they been genetically, altered to be, sweeter or crunchier or anything?
So we thus far, there is no such thing as a GMO cranberry.
Really?
They're quite... And I'll even say this, I'll start with, since the glaciers receded, cranberries have been growing in Wisconsin. We have acidic soils, whether those are peaty or sandy. The cranberry plant, ericoid species, were the first vascular plants to come back post-glacier. So they grew into the sphagnum moss and have these really cool partnerships with their mycorrhizal fungi that are able to pull nutrients from this really inhospitable acidic soil and make that available to the cranberry plant.
Okay.
So we are able to grow cranberries in soils that are really not going to be doing anything else. You could not possibly grow corn in the cranberry marsh.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask about that. Does this require some specific type of soil with certain acidic properties? But you said sandy,
yes.
which to me suggests not particularly moist.
Not always.
Okay.
You can have, the cranberries do require a lot of moisture.
Dispel my misunderstanding here. Disabuse me of this notion.
The sandy soils are always going to drain quickly, but that doesn't mean that water isn't going to be occurring and hanging out and standing there. If a river passes through an area that's sandy, that is still going to be moist, sandy soil. Even though it would drain quickly, you always have new water coming in.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. How are these things generally consumed? This is one of the weird things that I've always thought about cranberries, and I might be totally wrong, but we have them at Thanksgiving as a sort of what would you call it, a compote? Or
we call it sauce. We're old-fashioned.
Just cranberry sauce, just mashed up into sauce. And then there's cranberry juice. Do people, and this seems like a really silly question, but do people just grab a handful of cranberries and eat them like they would raspberries or strawberries?
Absolutely,
Absolutely,
yes.
Okay.
Well, I'll give you when I was 5 and tourists would come to watch the cranberry harvest process, I casually grab handfuls and eat them. And the tourists would say, "Wow, you can do that?" And I'd say, "Yeah, of course, have a handful." And they would try one and make a huge pucker face.
Yeah.
So I'll say, I, being weaned on cranberries, absolutely will eat them fresh and raw. We've also had people take fresh raw cranberries and dip them in chocolate ganache and then let that be a more happily palatable if you like tart version.
I'm sorry, what is ganache?
Oh, it's chocolate. It's chocolate mixed with cream and melted so that you can dip it. Right?
Wow. So it would be like a chocolate-covered strawberry
Yes.
that you'd have at a party or something.
Yes.
Okay, chocolate-covered. So they basically end up being chocolate-covered cranberries.
Basically, yeah.
That would be really good. Yeah, because they have this funny combination of tart and sweet. Yeah.
Yes.
And they're also, if you just eat a handful of them, which I guess I've never done, which I feel kind of like idiotic, but are they kind of crunchy? Or are they, what is the texture?
The texture is like an apple. So
Okay.
actually, if you bite open a cranberry and you look inside it, it has 5 air pockets that also are where the seeds hang out. And so the texture is going to be like an apple. They float like an apple would. They also bounce. And that's historically in the ancient days when every marsh harvested their own cranberries and put them in 1-pound bags for the grocery store on site, or even put them in barrels for the trains down to Chicago on site. They would use these sorting machines that let the cranberries bounce from one tier down to another. And a good cranberry is going to bounce and go into your barrel or your bag. And a bad cranberry is going to splat and fall down into the middle and only be good for making wine. So that's the ancient sorting technique that they really still use in processing facilities today.
And that's because of the air pockets?
Actually, it's the texture of the fruit is going to be. It would happen with an apple too, but cranberries are smaller, so it's easier, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really cool. I want to get more into the growing side of it because it's sandy, but then they're in bogs and that whole thing. I want to get into that. But first, who are the consumers of cranberries globally? Are some countries really huge consumers of cranberries and others not, or is it mainly a U.S. thing? Who are the buyers of these
So
things?
cranberries are native to America, and I would say that the largest percent of their consumers are North American.
Okay.
But there are big export markets. Europe is a huge export market, as well as Southeast Asia. There's different appetites throughout the world on whether they prefer juice versus preferring the sweetened dried cranberries versus fresh. I've not been in. You will forgive me for never having traveled outside of Wisconsin during the harvest season. I don't know if they're available fresh in other markets.
Okay, you're kind of locked here during harvest season.
It is true. I'm pretty close to home during those weeks.
And what do you do? So harvest season is upon us, and you spring into action. What is your day-to-day life like during the harvest season?
I want to give 2 separate answers, right? So
Please do,
as the Cranberry Outreach Specialist for the University of Wisconsin, I spend my day-to-day keeping a tight feedback loop between the growers of cranberries in Wisconsin and the researchers of cranberries who are doing research in Madison, but also on research sites, field visits out in the cranberry country. So during the course of a year, during the course of a week, I am hosting a lot of content, helping the researchers interact with the growers and helping implement new best practices.
Okay.
We're currently writing the new nutrient management guidelines. We host field days and cranberry schools and mini clinics to talk about disease pressures, to talk about new variety selection that's going on, to talk about all kinds of growing challenges that the growers face, floods and water use, and making sure that they're growing sustainably and very efficiently.
Nice.
And then over the course of that season, also, I'm doing a lot of field visits if people have a question, and it's kind of escalated to, I'm not sure, my dad's not sure, my grandpa's not sure, let's ask the university. And so they're able to check in with me, and then I can escalate it to the right researcher if we have a really curious question. I also help all the growers get their most challenging questions and their most pressing production issues clarified, and bring the information of what needs we've got to the researchers. So as the researchers are sculpting their research programs for the year, for the 5-year, for the 10-year, they're able to meet the growers' real challenges and needs. I think it's really one of one of the examples that I know of research working best. Like we find out what do the applied guys need? Great, let's do it. And then as a pause, I usually take my 2 weeks of vacation during the October harvest season to help my parents still run a cranberry marsh up in northern Wisconsin. Okay. And so I take vacation from my day job in order to be the person in waders pushing cranberries. A lot of times my job is sorting the leaves from the berries so that we're only sending berries to the receiving station.
Okay, all right. So your work life is cranberries, but then you take a break on vacation and work with cranberries.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Well, I love that you have a well-rounded lifestyle. So you're talking about helping the growers deal with the various pressures. So we've got the right nutrients. We got to have the right nutrients in the soil. We have to have the pestilence has to be, at a certain level, right? I know I'm using a biblical term, but the pests,
yes.
The bugs.
Yep.
And then you've got diseases. What is the fragility level of cranberries? How out of whack do things have to get before it becomes a serious problem?
Well, I'll say when you're the best in the world, you want to remain the best in the world.
That
so
is
a
true.
lot of times our cranberry growers are very sensitive to even a little raise in pressure. They're going to say, hey, I'm going to correct this. I'm going to make sure that I've got everything right, especially with moisture and especially with nutrients. One thing that a lot of people don't know about cranberries, if you give corn the right amount of nitrogen, it'll have efficient yields. If you give corn too much nitrogen, it won't have more yield. It'll just have that same yield, and you've wasted nitrogen, which is bad, but it is what it is. In cranberries, if you give cranberries the right amount of nitrogen, they'll produce the correct crop. If you give them too little nitrogen, you'll have too little yield. If you give them too much nitrogen, they're actually going to overgrow their leaves instead of their fruit. So if you over-fertilize cranberries, they're going to not produce fruit as much. They're going to have disease. They're going to be too lush. We call it luxury consumption. And so a cranberry plant is always making a choice about whether it's going to fill its fruit for this year or whether it's going to invest into next year and put on leaves.
Okay.
So if you give it too much nitrogen, it's going to invest in its leaves, and you're going to have this dense, bushy canopy growth that's going to promote disease. You're going to have fewer fruits and smaller fruits because you're pushing that leaf growth instead. So cranberry growers are hyper-focused on getting exactly the right amount of nitrogen and not even a quarter of a pound more.
Interesting. Okay. So that seems like an odd thing because normally plants and animals, they tend to make what are the most advantageous genetic choices. So if I'm getting too much nitrogen and I invest more in my leaves and that promotes disease, that seems antithetical. Why, if we put this in the realm of a conscious choice, which obviously it's not, why is this choice made in that case?
So a cranberry can reproduce two ways. It can either do seeds, which is fruit, which is what the growers want to produce and people who like cranberry sauce on Thanksgiving want to eat.
Right.
It can also produce clonally. So if a cranberry, kind of like a strawberry, they'll send out a long runner. And so it's making the choice, I'm going to send out more runners. It's basically, am I going to reproduce this year via seed or next year via my tissue? And when I say disease, that's a disease of the fruit, not a disease of the plant, of the vine. So if you're investing in next year, you don't care what happens to the fruit.
Right. If you're a plant, you just want to reproduce. You
Yes.
don't care if that energy goes to leaves or fruit because,
You're just making a strategic choice there.
You're just making a strategic choice. That is just so amazing. And I'm always fascinated by these genetic, for lack of a better word, choices that both animals and plants. Let's make sure we can reproduce and have more of us next year. and so I never thought of that. You could put the investment into leaves or fruit, and putting the investment in leaves doesn't help the farmers at all. Cool. Let's get into the physicality of this, because cranberries, to me, they've always been very confusing, because we talk about the type of soil we need, and it's sandy soil, and it has moisture, but the moisture drains out pretty quickly, and this stuff happens. But we don't think of cranberries and sand. We think of cranberries and bogs. Where does the shift happen, and what do the bogs do?
So there's actually there's a few different places cranberries can grow. Acidic is always the anchor. It has to be acidic.
Okay.
So when we talk about wetlands, there's an easy 4-part. If it has trees, it's a swamp. If it doesn't have trees, it's a marsh. And then
I did not even know that. That is really, trees are the deciding factor between swamp and marsh.
Yes.
That is, oh my gosh, okay. I am going to retain that bit of information. That's terrific. Okay.
And then on the other axis, if you're a wetland, a fen is basic or alkaline, and a bog is acidic.
Okay.
We'd refer to it as a bog whether it's sandy or peaty. We'd refer to it as a marsh whether it's sandy or peaty, based on if it's acidic, based on if it doesn't have trees.
Okay. And when you say basic, you mean non-acidic?
Correct.
Yeah,
I mean,
got it. Okay, cool. Just to clarify for the audience. Okay.
Yes. High pH.
Yes. Got it. Okay.
Well, and I think I'll actually even take this back a little bit. So the glaciers depart. Sphagnum moss starts to show up to slurp up some spare nutrients that are left in the landscape. And then cranberries and their relatives grow and are able to steal a couple of nutrients away from the sphagnum moss. So they've evolved to these very acidic conditions. In their native habitat, water comes and goes and rises and falls over the course of a year. And so the cranberry plant, because of the way it takes up nutrients, which is in this partnership with fungi, cranberries are relatively robust to having water around, more so than a lot of other plants are.
Okay.
They're still going to grow better the more root mass they have. And so the lower the water table is, the larger their root systems will be. So if you have a 2-inch root mass, if your roots are only 2 inches deep, you have only that volume of roots. If you have root mass that's 6 inches deep, you have a lot more root surface available to take up nutrients. And so you're going to have a more robust plant. So we like areas that can have moisture. Obviously, the flooding is our really fantastic harvesting technique that means that we get to have a much lower labor needs than other fruit harvesting processes do. But we want to be able to have that water high when we need it and low when we don't need it. Okay.
And it's needed to be high during, the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, during harvest season, because as you mentioned before, the fruit floats.
Yes.
And so I imagine that just makes it easier to pick.
Yes.
So then do people just slog through in waders and pick it, or how is that done?
We've got a pretty cool historic arc, right? So the original harvesters are, obviously before colonization of America. Originally, the Native Americans would just pick by hand.
Yeah.
And after cranberry growing started in 1850s in Wisconsin, and originally people didn't actually live on the marshes. They would just own the land, bring harvest crews, and then harvest also by picking, and then go back home. Legend has it, which again, taking off my university hat to say legend has it, I don't really know for sure, but legend has it, there was a forest fire and somebody's cranberry crop was destroyed. They brought their pickers up and said, oh, there's no cranberries here. Well, I'll have to live here so that I can prevent forest fires. And then while he was living there, he realized, well, I can do all this other cool stuff like frost protection and all of that. So they started to be more and more efficient over time once people started living on the marshes. So harvesting then evolved to these kind of combs, like rake box combs.
Okay.
And people would rake them up. And then we would flood usually for frost protection. So somebody put on a flood, and then as they were lowering the flood again in the morning, the flood wasn't all the way down. They sent their pickers out anyway, and the pickers said, hey, this is way easier because the cranberries are floating. I can comb, like if you're combing through tangled hair,
right.
It's easier if it's underwater versus just being damp.
Yeah.
And then a fellow out in New Jersey who had been an airplane engine engineer, brother with the cranberry marsh passed away, and he came over to take over the cranberry marsh and said we could do this rake box thing, but as a machine, and got these cool comb scoops to kind of rotate on a bunch of pulleys and a cool system like that as people walked. Obviously, people want to sit down while they work, so they did basically that machine, but with a chair. And then they came up with the next iteration was the beater, which is if you think of like a wheat combine, but without the tines, will now like flood the cranberry beds so that the vines are. So the berries are floating, and you'll walk through the bed with this tumbling drum that's going to shake the cranberries off of their vines. Okay. And then those would be corralled with an oil spill boom. And then the final iteration that we're currently on is a harrow system. So if you have a tractor, and we say harrow, but it's not to be confused with what row crop farmers say when they say harrow. We're taking their tines, but leaving them gently to just do a gentle combing. And then again, still the berries float. You corral them with oil spill boom, and then pump them out of the water, and then off to the receiving station.
Okay, cool. And then next year it'll be humanoid robots going through and picking the cranberry.
Everyone is always doing really cool experiments in anyone's garage. You go find out, like, what are you guys trying next year? What are you guys trying next year? Farmers have a fantastic culture of experimentation, and it's fun and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, the mother of invention, necessity. What is the most unique or clever or appetizing, or whatever word you want to use, way that you've seen cranberries served? What can people do that they have not thought of yet?
What you haven't thought of yet, we have a food scientist at the University of Wisconsin who's doing such research.
Oh, cool.
But my personal answer lately is to make creme brulee, but in between filling your creme brulee tray, put some cranberry sauce so you have surprise cranberries in the middle of your creme brulee.
Oh, nice.
It's pretty tasty.
That would be really tasty. Yeah, that would be really tasty. Because I've only had the two things that you normally have. I've had the sauce and I've had the juice. And I don't. But now I'm going to see if I can find some cranberries that I can just eat a handful of, and then I can make the puckery face that you spoke of.
I really do recommend it. I really do.
Okay. And then finally, we talked a little bit off mic about, I know that part of your time off is spent with your parents. And is your grandfather still alive?
No, sadly, he passed before I was born. Yeah, okay,
because that's where you started, right? In 1939, your grandfather had this cranberry marsh, and that's where you got started on this whole thing. That is really, really cool. But when you're not involved in cranberries, either in your research or in your work or with your family, what do you like to do? I know you have a newborn, so that's probably taking up a little time.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
She sounds like a happy, healthy girl.
Thank you. She's lovely. She's the best.
Yeah.
And we're already taking her to barn dances.
That's great. So let's talk about this. This is like not. And I love this about meeting people like yourself, because it's like, oh, I'm this really smart person who's doing this research and I'm doing this thing. And then, what's your hobby? And you come out with, oh, barn dancing. So like, okay, not what I was expecting. So tell us about this.
Yeah, my prior job in row crops was down south near a bigger city, and I danced every Friday and Saturday night. And when I came back to Wisconsin, I said, well, there's not currently a folk dance community nearby, so I'll have to learn how to call dances before I move back to Wisconsin. Learned to call dances, met a good band, and we host a monthly barn dance. And I've been so thrilled. We have dancers all ages, 4 through, 94. And we have usually 85 to 100 people every month in rural Wisconsin showing up to dance. And I feel so thrilled to get to continue the, folk music and folk dance cultures. The only way those get passed on is by people doing it and loving it. So you got to make sure people can love it.
That is terrific. And I have a really weird question about that too, just because this is outside my, reality. I've never really done a barn dance, but so there's a caller who says, okay, Alamond left, do this, grab your partner, swing your partner, all this kind of stuff. Is it more guidance to keep everybody moving together, or does it actually slip over into instruction? Are you actually teaching?
Yes, it is absolutely teaching.
Okay, I thought so.
Dance calling is kind of, first, you're teaching people who haven't been there before what the different figures are. You're also monitoring the crowd and choosing the right level of dance for the skill level of the crowd. If you go too complicated, people will be frustrated. If you go too easy, people will be bored. So you've got to see what's happening. If you've got a parent dancing with their child and they're falling out, you sometimes come in and give a little extra help. And then you're also guiding and reminding. So there's a lot of... it's not behind the scenes because obviously you're up there with a microphone, but it feels behind the scenes. It feels like you are more like creating a space for people to have fun and making sure that they're educated and they have the tools to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds really fun. I should try that sometime. I took I host a TV show, and part of it was, it's a long story, but we were doing this concert recording for this program, and in between bands, there was a guy who came in and did salsa dance instruction, and the executive director of the TV show, I said, "Are we going to record the dance lesson?" And she said, "Actually, Buzz, you're going to take the dance lesson, and we're going to film you." And I said, "Oh, good. The clumsy white guy gets to go." And she said, "That's exactly right." And so
Fantastic.
I was like, okay, so that's what we did. And so I had the Latin salsa version of what you're doing, like part
Awesome.
Instruction and part guidance. Terrific stuff. Is there anything about cranberries before we wrap it that you would like to say, but I just haven't asked the right question to get to?
Actually, I think you asked a question and I went the wrong direction with it. But you had earlier asked about what cranberry varieties are like.
Yeah.
And we still have in Wisconsin cranberry growers who are growing native selection. Native selections is our word for the original cranberries that were just natively here.
Oh, cool. Okay.
We always grow cranberries where they naturally want to grow, and some growers still have their original selections too. Beyond that, we've had selections crossed and hybridized. So we are currently, the most modern hybrids are about 3 crosses from native. So in every case, you know who the parents are of the cranberry that you're planting. And you can go say, that one had parents in Wisconsin and parents in Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
I will then go ahead and close on the actual, so Wisconsin has been, for the last 20 years, the largest producer of cranberries in the world, but for more than 150 years has been a major producer. And from the time since the glaciers left, have had cranberries growing here. We're really proud of this cranberry growing culture. In my role at the university, helping to make sure that growers are really connected with the research that's going on, helping researchers meet the growers' direct needs with that research is super rewarding. And I know all cranberry researchers at Madison, or at the university, I know all the cranberry researchers at the University of Wisconsin and all the Wisconsin cranberry growers are committed to and thrilled to keep Wisconsin the powerhouse of cranberries worldwide.
Terrific. Well, yay us. Let's keep the championship belt on ourselves. That would be just terrific. And I actually just thought of one more question. I know that central and northern Wisconsin are the main areas for this, not so much in the southern part of the state. Are climate pressures pushing that north, or how is that? Going?
Cranberries are only going to grow where we have these acidic soils. So it's 19 counties in Wisconsin, and I think of it as 4 regions. There's a Wisconsin Rapids region, there's a Warrens-Toma region, there's a Manitowish Waters region, and there's kind of a Spooner, Wisconsin region. And those are probably not going to change with climate pressure just because that's where the soils are appropriate.
Okay,
but we absolutely are seeing changes in winter flooding practices. The last few winters in Wisconsin have not been as mighty and brutal as the Wisconsin winter, in my opinion, should be.
Yeah, the robust winters that we had. Yeah.
And so with those reducing severity winters, we are seeing more disease pressure than we used to see.
Yeah.
We are seeing stress in the vines. Paradoxically, when it's a cold winter, we can put on a good protective flood and protect the vines from the cold.
Right.
When we can't put on that protective flood as easily, now our vines are susceptible to cold damage.
Yeah.
So we're watching that. Amaya Atucha is doing work in her lab on heat stress, and that's just started in the last couple of years. So and obviously if insect pressures are different in the southern part of the state versus
Correct.
the northern part of the state.
Right.
So as we see the world's always changing, we're always going to have new challenges to face. But one of the challenges that we're facing is, well, what do we do with a mild winter? And how do we adapt to insects that we haven't had to deal with before?
Yeah, no doubt. Wow. Well, I have learned a lot. Allison Jonjak, thank you so much for doing this. Now I know a lot more about cranberries than I ever did before. And yay, Wisconsin, let's stay number one. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
Very proud.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That was some fun stuff.
You've been listening to the Badger Talks podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Allison Jonjak, Cranberry Outreach Specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please browse our previous episodes for other topics that may be of interest to you. The Badger Talks podcast is a creation of UW Connects and produced at Audio for the Arts Recording Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. Our music is composed by Bill Purdy and performed by the UW Marching Band. I'm Buzz Kemper. Thank you for listening.